Hey guys, Sean here, coming to you once again to deliver another fantastic conversation, what I hope will be an interesting interview. And as I've been editing some content this week, I was just thinking about I don't often get to explain how I discovered an author or their book or what sparked my interest that I wanted to have them on the show. And I can't guarantee I'll have the bandwidth to do that every time, but I really want to make sure I'm actually giving you context for why I was drawn to somebody as much as I'm able to going forward. So, my guest today is Mark Anthony, and if you're watching on video, I'm going to hold up his book cover. There it's flashing across the screen. His his book is called The Afterlife Frequency, and I actually discovered Mark in this book listening to an episode of the podcast slash radio show called Darkness Radio, and I actually discovered Darkness Radio back when I was in Bible college, finishing up my undergrad. I drove home very late at night and I would flip the radio and I would often find Darkness Radio on at like 10:30 at night. And so I've just been listening to them for years, and they would talk about ghosts and the afterlife, near-death experiences, paranormal things. So kind of the wide range of things that fits under that umbrella. That has been the focus of Darkness Radio for many years. And that was how I discovered Mark, listening to their podcast a number of months back. And if you've been following my show really the past 8, 9 months, you've no doubt noticed that I've done a lot of conversations related to afterlife and near death experiences. Some of those have been on my podcast, Two Christian Dudes, that I co host with my good friend Randy Kay. And others have been on this podcast, The Sean Tabbitt Show. And so as I grow in this area, learn more in this area, I'm increasingly reaching out to a wider range of authors to have on the show just to get a sense of the broad mix of conversations that are happening in the near death experience space. Randy and I approach NDEs from a Christian perspective, but voices speaking into this space vary quite greatly. Some are coming from more of a new age perspective, some are coming from more of a secular, a scientific perspective, other world religions. And so the field is quite broad when it comes to those who are writing and doing interviews and having conversations about near death experiences and the afterlife. And I'll say for this show, Mark is a first. I don't know that I've ever had on a medium before. Mark identifies as a medium. He's popularly known as the psychic lawyer. And I really enjoyed the conversation because we get into his background, his parents, his kind of faith upbringing, what it's like for him in his practice of mediumship a little bit. And so I know that might be a little weird or stretch some of you, but since I had the opportunity, I asked all kinds of questions, things that really interested me, really about his journey, his personal spiritual formation, if you will. And so I know that may challenge some of you. I found it particularly fascinating and interesting. In terms of what interested me in talking to Mark about near-death experiences, a number of things really struck me with this book. I really appreciated some of the nuanced categories that he talks about in the book. He talks about near-death experiences, obviously, disturbing near-death experiences, and also shared near-death experiences. And so he's had some good definitions and nuances that really just helped me to get a broader context and a better language as I'm doing more interviews and have some books that we're writing around near-death experiences. And so I really appreciated that aspect of what Mark shares in this book. And then also, I really feel like he has done a nice job of bringing together a lot of good data and information around that intersection of science and faith, really trying to better understand what happens when a soul leaves the body. And so all that really drew me to Mark and his book. And so I just enjoyed the journey of learning about his story, the path that he's been on, and just all the time that he's spent really investigating, researching. I think he would describe himself as a psychic researcher or investigator. I think it'd be fair to even call him kind of a paranormal investigator as well. And so a fascinating conversation, a fun conversation. And I'm going to check out some of Mark's other books. And I wouldn't be surprised to have him back on the show again. So there you go. You've got context for how I discovered Mark and his book and how he came to be on the podcast. And without further ado, here's my interview with Mark Anthony about his book, The Afterlife Frequency. Enjoy. It's time for another episode of The Sean Tabbitt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, digging into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is Mark Anthony, and we're going to be discussing his new book, the Afterlife Frequency, the scientific proof of spiritual contact, and how that awareness will change your life. Mark, it is truly an honor, sir. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sean. It's great being here, and I appreciate you inviting me to the show.
Oh, truly my pleasure. One of my great joys is just listening to some of my other favorite podcasts and shows and discover authors that I think would be interesting to talk to. I heard you on Darkness Radio a couple of months back, and that was how we've ended up in this situation, having our own conversation. However, I know a lot of the folks in my audience haven't had the chance to meet you yet, so let's kick this off by having you share a bit of the Mark Anthony origin story for somebody meeting you for the first time in our talk today. What are a few things they should know about you?
Well, the media has labeled me Mark Anthony, the psychic lawyer, although my official brand is Mark Anthony JD, which is my law degree, psychic explorer, because I study mystical and spiritual phenomenon. And yes, I am an attorney. I've tried over 100 jury trials. I've attended Oxford University, graduated Mercer University Law School, and I've lectured at Harvard, Brown, Columbia, Yale on the afterlife and the science and spirituality of it. And I was born into a family where the ability to communicate with spirits is a recessive genetic trait. My dad was a U.S. Navy SEAL and a NASA engineer. And when he got out of the Navy, he said he was at a dance. He was at a USO dance or some type, where sailors and soldiers. And he said, I saw this really foxy looking dame. And he's talking about my mom. And he thought she was like 30 years old, but she was 19. She worked as an illustrator and a fashion designer at a high-end department store. And so it was so funny hearing my parents talk about how they connected. Because in that day, a gentleman acted like a gentleman, a lady acted like a lady. And after a few dates, my mother said, "There's something you need to know about me." She said, "I see spirits." And my dad says, "Oh, good Lord, I do too." And so when you get two parents with the same recessive trait, then the likelihood of one of their children having that trait increases exponentially. And that, of course, would be me. So I started seeing spirits around the time I was 3.5. I have a vivid recollection of me talking to my friends, except mom and dad can see them. And I remember mom saying, "Oh, he's got it." And dad, "Oh, he's got it." And then when I was about 4, actually I was 4, I had a near-death experience, which I write about extensively in the Afterlife Frequency. So my entire life, Sean, I've had this ability to communicate with spirits. And I grew up in a family where it was not looked at as a negative thing. But my dad was very insistent that I only talk about it to mom and dad. And as I got older, I began to see that, not everybody's parents were like mine. So I could go on and on, but I think that's in a nutshell, how, where I came from. And, as a medium, it's not unusual to be drawn to the spiritual. And I know, and I'm very well aware of the biblical prescriptions against mediumship, in Leviticus 15 and in Deuteronomy 18. But if people examine those more closely, particularly Deuteronomy 23, 21 and 22, the standard for what is called a prophet, which is, what is also referred to as a medium in the Bible, is whether what comes through is truth. And then certainly in the New Testament, in Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 12, verses 4 through 12, it describes, the Apostle Paul describes that we have different gifts from God. And some of those gifts are discernment of spirits. And then in Romans 12, verses 6 through 8, it also indicates that we all have gifts from God, and one of them being prophecy. And those are just a few examples. So there's many places throughout the Bible where spirit communication is not necessarily looked at as a negative thing. And it's one of the lectures that I do present, because I was going to go into the clergy, but I decided that it was too restrictive. and had too many rules and regulations. So I ended up in law school. So in a way, Sean, I jumped out of the rule and regulation frying pan into the regulatory fire, so to speak.
Yes, you left one form of extreme structure for another form of extreme structure.
Extreme structure, yes.
Well, and I want to pull a little bit more on the thread of your upbringing. So both of your parents can see in the spirit. You're seeing things from about age 3.5, and I just know with many friends who in my circles identify themselves as seers or prophets. That's often about the age 3, 4 when they start seeing
Yeah.
things. That seems very typical.
Yes.
I think your family was Catholic to some degree. I'm just curious, like
Yeah. Yeah.
as you move forward, like what are some of the influences? Is it mostly personal experience? Were there other authors or people that influenced your journey? Like I always like to understand how somebody grew into what they're operating in, who they are today.
Well, my mother's family was Catholic, and they were Italian, and they looked at this as a gift from God. They called it the gift of second sight. In fact, in 2016, PBS did a 4 hour special called The Italian Americans, and there was a 7 minute segment where they actually featured my maternal great grandmother, Giovanna, because she was known as the woman who knows things. And she was a very gifted psychic medium. And she, nuns, priests, even bishops and cardinals, a lot of officials in the Catholic Church in the Little Italy community of New York City and North New Jersey would consult with her. And she was not arrogant about it at all. She used to pray every day. She was a very pious woman, did a lot of great works of charity. And then my dad's side of the family, they hailed from Pennsylvania, and they were Pennsylvanian conservative Baptists. In fact, my great grandfather on my dad's, I think, maternal side actually founded a Baptist church, which I visited a few years ago with my dad, when he was still here in this world. And it was just amazing to walk into this church that my family had founded. And it was I know I'm digressing here a bit, but I remember my dad, he was in his 80s, and he burst into tears. He goes, "That's where my mother was laid out." And all of a sudden I saw my dad no longer the wise, tough guy Navy SEAL, but for a glimpse I saw the 17-year-old boy who lost his mom. And so grief is something that we never get over. It's something that we learn to live with. And as I'm sure you and all of the audience members can relate to, that even though you get to the point where, all right, I've accepted it and I've found peace, there will be those triggers that open it wide up. And that's part of the work that I do. Part of the reason that I've written the books that I have is to help people understand that grief is a necessary part of life. And Sean, as one of my mentors said, his name was Father Sonny. Father Sonny was one of the coolest guys ever. He was the type of priest. I remember I knock on his door, because he invited me over, and I open up the door. He goes, "Want a margarita?" And I was expecting, but he was a down to earth guy, and every one of his talks ended with love. And he says it's always about love. But he said something that I think everybody needs to understand, is that grief is the price of love, and that we grieve as deeply as we have love. That's why it hurts so bad. And then he said, but a life without love isn't much of a life at all.
Amen. That's a universal experience there. Love and grief, and the deeper we love, the more we grieve. But that's all part of the process. I think the next place to go is let's just get into some of the meat from the book. I have other directions I want to go. We'll see if we have time to get there. Tell us a little bit about what is the afterlife frequency in terms of obviously that's the title of the book. Where did you discover kind of that theme, that topic? What research or experiences went into it? Like I guess. A story behind the book. That's what I'm trying to ask. Where did that get started? How did you discover that?
Oh gosh, there's so much there, which is why I wrote the book. But in my work with spirituality throughout my entire life, when we die, think of our soul as a drop of water, and look, every great spiritual teacher, from the Hindu sages through Moses, through Buddha, through Christ, Native American spirituality, yeah, Muhammad, Gandhi, Billy Graham, Mother Teresa, all teach that the soul pre-exists the body, comes into the body, and leaves when the body dies. And so and we know from the science of the brain, which is the field of neuroscience, that the brain has an electromagnetic field. We know from the laws of physics that energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. So I began studying quantum physics in addition to my lifelong study of all the different belief systems. And I developed the term the electromagnetic soul to describe what we really are, which is pure consciousness, a soul, which is eternal electromagnetic energy. So our brain is like a computer hard drive. Your computer hard drive, whether you use Mac or a Windows application, it didn't create the operating system. Okay. It hosts it. And it hosts the data that's on it. So when the hard drive crashes, in other words, when you die, that's uploaded. Now, where does it get uploaded? Well, it gets uploaded to a higher vibrational frequency. So the other side, heaven, nirvana, the afterlife, is not some distant nebulous realm orbiting Alpha Centauri light years away. It's a parallel dimension, which is why spirits, why the divine is so ever present and connected to us. So essentially, we quantum leap. So, how did I come up with the title for the book? Well, I was working with my publisher, and I had a couple different ideas, and I decided to take a walk on the beach. Because I had the writer's block and all that. So I'm walking on the beach, and I go, well, the book is about the afterlife, and I discuss brainwave frequency and the higher frequency. And I go, the afterlife frequency. It just came to me. So I ran home, did a Google search, an internet search, couldn't find any book with that title, called my publisher. They said, I love this. And so that, in a nutshell, is how it happened. But how I decided to write the book, if I may, the best friend that I ever had, his name is Billy, and he's in chapter one. Okay, Billy's in chapter one. Billy, I knew since I was 11 years old. We met and we went to junior high, high school, college together. After college, I went to law school. He went to Asia and he learned to speak Japanese, Thai, Indonesian, and some Cantonese. He just had this gift for languages. And even though we both been raised in the Catholic faith, his family was Irish. Mine, was my mom's side of the family was Italian. He was an atheist, and we had this ongoing discussion, Sean, our entire lives, as to the existence of God. And he would say, well, there's no science, there's no technology to prove it. He goes, but I don't understand how you do that psychic thing. Okay. So that was always going on. And he even asked me to perform his wedding ceremony. I was a notary. I was practicing law full time then. And because he'd met this beautiful, amazing woman from Japan. We're still good friends. And I performed their wedding ceremony. And Sean, it was one of the best days of my life. I was standing there on the podium, my best friend marrying my new best friend, and everybody that I loved was there. My parents were there, his parents were there, all of our friends from high school onward. It was just it's one of those points of light in your life. And then a couple of years after that, he passed from suicide. And I don't want to go into the details out of respect for that. And obviously, I was devastated. Well, about a year after that, my first book, Never Letting Go, had just been released. And I was speaking at a Darkness Radio conference in Estes Park, Colorado. And I had just done my presentation. So I was in the conference room or the convention area, and there was at least 100 vendors there. So I'm signing books. And my manager, Rocky, she's walking around looking at the ghost investigation equipment, the paranormal investigation equipment. And she walks by this one table, and the gentleman that was manning it, his name is Chris. And as she walks by this device called the Spirit Box, she hears "Get Mark," and she stops. And she's looking at it, and Chris goes, "Did that just say something?" And then she hears "Get Mark" again, and he goes, "Do you think he means your Mark Anthony?" So I'm sitting there signing books, and I hear Mark, and I look up, and Chris and Rocky they're going through this conniption, and I'm like, oh my gosh. So I run over, and my heart almost stops, because when I walk up to it, there's this crowd of people around. All of a sudden I hear, "Dude." And I knew that voice. And I looked at Rocky, and tears are in her eyes. And then I hear, "Love you, bro." And it went to static. And it was his voice. And Rocky knew him. And she goes, "Dear God, Mark, that was," and I go, "Billy's voice." And I'm the medium. I'm the one that's used to giving people messages that, oh my gosh, how could that happen? And certainly I was thankful and overwhelmed. But then I started thinking, wait a second. The atheist who said there's no science and no technology to prove the afterlife, what did he choose? But a technological device, frequency, a device that scans electromagnetic frequency bands. He chose that device to, to communicate with me. And so, Sean, that got the wheels turning, that I had to do the research and write a book that explains the different forms of spirit communication, whether it's something like that or mediumship or a direct visitation that many of the listeners have probably had in a dream, or they feel they see a loved one in their peripheral vision, shared death experiences, near death experiences. And so that's why I wrote the Afterlife Frequency, to explain how all these different forms of spiritual contact are based on sound scientific principles, and that doesn't violate spirituality or faith.
One of the things you use this phrase a number of times in the book, you talk about opening your brain to the afterlife frequency. And I think in terms of a lot of the books I've read, whether we're saying prayer, meditation, people will talk about a thinning of the veil. There seem to be certain places in the world where it's easy to commune with God, if you will, or where things just seem more open. So in terms of, or I think of prophetic friends I've had conversations with where they talk about kind of having to sometimes try to shut things off so they're not hearing things constantly. I'd love for you to just talk a little bit to whether it's a shift or a change. Are we changing the state of our mind, changing the state of our atmosphere to be more open to communicating or hearing? I'm just curious how that relates to your experience and kind of that phrase of opening your brain to the afterlife frequency.
Well, when I start my sessions, I always open with a prayer, and that's how I turn it on. Now, let me tell you what's happening from the biomechanical standpoint. We have 5 different types of brainwave frequencies: gamma, beta, alpha, theta, delta. Gamma is super high functioning. That's when you win 30 Jeopardy episodes in a row. Okay, you're just moving at that ultra high performance. You're revving your brain at full throttle. Beta is the normal awake state. That's where you can drive a car, write checks, go to work, deal with your kids, life. As we begin to relax, either in meditation, daydream, or start to fall asleep, that's alpha. Theta is dream state sleep, and delta is very low functioning brain waves. But it's extremely important because that's when your body fights infections and rebuilds and heals. The alpha theta border between the relaxed and the deep sleep is where psychic and mediumistic activity occurs. For most people, this takes several hours to achieve in the dream state. That's why, throughout the Bible, Joseph being warned about Herod, the 3 wise men, in the Old Testament, the prophet Joseph interpreting the dreams of Pharaoh, of the plagues yet to come upon Egypt. And so this is a very established form of spirit communication in throughout history. And what the people, including myself and neuroscientists who study this phenomenon, don't understand is why can certain people go from beta to alpha theta within seconds when normally it takes hours? And they believe that it has something to do with the pineal gland in the brain. Now, this is one of the topics that I go into in great detail in the afterlife frequency, but that is answering your question in a nutshell. And so it's getting to the alpha theta border, and you've got to define the parameters. You got to let spirits know I'm doing this or I'm not doing this, because they'll respect your privacy.
And many in my audience know that we've been talking about near-death experiences for the last 7, 8 months. In terms of near-death experiences, or what you call DNDEs, people who have more of a scary, a negative, a hell experience. From your perspective of working with people, what's the difference in impact? Because I've talked to people who've had both, and sometimes they have positive experience, sometimes negative. With what you've seen, what's the difference in impact between those two experiences? What's the results for people?
Well, a DNDE, the distressing near death experience, also known as the hellish NDE, is where people don't go into the light and encounter their deceased loved ones and the divine energy that we call God. Which even the word God is too limiting, because it's encountering this is just incredible, filled with love. From my observations, near death experiences, and that's where somebody dies and then their spirit, their electromagnetic soul separates, there are frequencies that it goes through. And so for people who have the traditional near death experience with the light and the loved ones and God, they go to the higher frequency. They actually touch the afterlife frequency. But I gave a lecture at the International Association for Near Death Studies called the NDE zone. And for people who don't quite get to that, they are in between our material world dimension and the afterlife frequency, yet their consciousness is intact and they get the sense of a void, the desolation, the negativity. And oftentimes they come back from the experience with accounts of there's nothing. I felt alone. I felt isolated. And so these have been termed hellish. So I think that it's a matter of frequency once again. Now I am really condensing this down because I know we're pressed for time. We could do an entire show just on that. And I also chronicle shared death experiences, which I'm sure a lot of your audience members, if you've been in close proximity to a loved one who's in the process of transitioning, oftentimes that person will have deathbed visions where they'll be discussing or saying, "Oh, I see mom," and their mother has died years ago, or whoever it is that they're seeing, or more than one person. But then people who are in physical close proximity, they start to see these spirits too, or they start to feel like they're coming off their feet, like kind of floating. They may see a surge of white light come out of the person's body when he or she passes. And this is known as a shared death experience, because the frequency of the electromagnetic souls of the observers is now overlapping with this surge of frequency of the person who is transitioning and connecting with spirits who are part of the afterlife frequency. It's all frequency overlap. It's like, if you're driving down the highway and you're listening to an AM radio station, yet you drive past an FM station near the highway, and all of a sudden you start picking up on that. Okay, there's nothing new about radio frequency interference or radio frequency overlap. And it certainly is the same thing when it comes to the shared death experience.
I think the next thing I'd love to have you comment on would be a life review. Some people report having a life review during their near death experience. And I don't remember your specific angle, but I do remember when I listened to the book that it was a bit different than what I've read or heard in some of the other books that I've encountered. So, what's the purpose of a life review from your perspective?
The life review is a very controversial thing. Let me put it to you like this. We all are aware of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. And it's very possible that Charles Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol based on the Life Review and a DNDE, a hellish NDE. Think about it. Ebenezer Scrooge is the epitome of narcissism and materialism. And he goes through being visited by three spirits. One that shows him his past, a life review. When he was a young man, there was love in his life. He showed promise, but the seed of greed was already there. The ghost of Christmas present shows him what he's turned into, which is a miserable miser and nasty and, oh, let the surplus population decrease, And then he confronts the spirit of Christmas yet to come and sees how people mock him when he dies. They couldn't care less. His life wasn't even worth having lived. And the thing about Charles Dickens is, obviously, he was a genius. He wrote, incredible books. And there's a reason that that story endures. And I'm using it as an illustration here because that is what oftentimes happens during a distressing near-death experience. And also during a life review. People, before they die, your electromagnetic soul replays events throughout the life. Some people feel in the Christian context, this is judgment. And is it God judging you, or is it your soul, or is it both? Because your electromagnetic soul, energetically, we're all connected to God. And so is this where we are reviewing our lives? And particularly with people that have the DNDE, the distressing near-death experience, the vast majority of reported cases, these people do a major turnaround in their lives. Even if they weren't necessarily a scoundrel or an evil person, they can replay things that were not shining points in their lives. And it's kind of a cosmic wake-up call. Have you ever heard Buddha say, go start a war? You ever hear Jesus say, go start a war? The enlightened spiritual teachers are all about peace, love, understanding, not resort to violence. And the violence doesn't necessarily have to be on a national scale. It could be within your own heart. Think about it. Anger. I heard a saying recently that anger is a punishment you inflict on yourself for somebody else's mistake. It's a good way of putting it. When we get anger, when we speak or act in anger, and we then hurt another person, God forbid physically, but also perhaps emotionally. And so it's very important in the life review for this to come to a head, and this can profoundly impact how somebody conducts their life from that point onward.
Yeah, in my experience with the wide range of folks we've talked to about near-death experiences, they're all significantly marked, and the majority of them seem to be marked in a positive way, more loving, more empathetic. We've encountered a handful of people where that wasn't their experience, but that's been more the exception and not the rule. Like most people see compelled to love more, do better, kind of live their best life, become the best person they can be, like they've been given a second chance. That's consistently been what we've seen from people. Mark, I know we're almost at time. Do you have a few minutes to do like some rapid fire? If
Go
not,
right ahead. Yeah.
okay. Again, I'm a technical person. Worked at software companies early in my career. I like to process and understand things. So, one of the things you talk about in the book is a tingling sensation in the presence of spirits. It made me think of Spider-Man and his Spidey sense. But so just I
Similar
would love to hear
principle.
I'd love to hear just like what that looks like or what that feels like. I'm curious.
Okay, I get this tingly sensation. It just runs down my spine. And what it is, that's why a lot of people think spirit communication is spooky and scary, because it's the same physiological response in fight or flight. And what's happening is spirits are pure electromagnetic souls. Their EM band is now interfacing with ours, and our nervous system reacts with the tingles. So that's what that feels like. So
Awesome.
I've done this enough right now. Oh, not scary. It's like, cool. I get like, cool, there's a spirit, So
And then in terms of broadly speaking, you've talked about getting things in dreams and whatnot. I'm just curious, in hearing from spirits, and I'm making air quotes. thought impressions, visions, dreams. I know you talk about like pain sensation when you feel like
Yeah.
to help you identify who the message is for. Like what's the range for you in hearing from spirits?
Well, it's I see, hear, feel, taste, smell, touch, know. And it all has to do with when a spirit's EMS or a collective of spirits, because they're never alone. They always come in groups, and it's the nature of the collective consciousness, which is the other side, the afterlife frequency, and they're emitting waves of frequency. So initially, when I connect with a spirit, first I'll get their gender, then I'll get an idea of their connection to you. Maybe it's your generation or the one above it or below it, and then I'll start feeling how the person physically passed. And so, different causes of death may have a similar physical sensation, like an impact to my head could be head trauma, stroke, aneurysm, or quick passing. But this happens really fast. So I'll say, okay, I'm getting this, and this, and this. And when the client's able to confirm these things, that's how the spirit and I are locking onto each other. Then when they lock onto me, that's when they're going to start giving deeper messages, guidance or perhaps shared memories, messages of love, healing, and resolution.
And I'm just realizing now we haven't even mentioned raft. So that's a key part of what you teach people. Just give us the like a quick
The
version of what
raft
that is.
Yeah, I wish we had time for me to tell the story of how I developed or how it was given to me. But the raft technique is how I teach people in this book how to recognize signs from spirits. R, accept the contact as real. A, feel it without overthinking it. F, and T, trust in the message. The raft technique. And it's the third step, feeling without overthinking it, where majority of people go wrong. Oh, it's just a grief-induced hallucination. Oh, it's coincidence. Oh, I'm making it up. Oh, it's my imagination. And boom, you throw a brick at it. The trust part. All right, because a lot of people say, "Oh, it's communication from spirits is demonic." It's like, yeah, let's get rid of that primitive nonsense. You know that it's a message from the divine, and spirits are an extension of the divine. If it's about love, healing, and resolution. Okay, messages from spirits are about guidance and about love. They're never about, let's start an insurrection, let's put on a bomb vest and blow up children. Okay, it's never that. That's the human ego. So when you get these people, it always really torques me when I see the news refer to a terrorist spiritual advisor. No, they're not spiritual advisor, they're religious fanatics who are getting idiots to go do the egotistical work of somebody with a political agenda. True gifts from the spirit are not about the ego, which is edging God out. Gifts from God, healing, love, resolution, finding inner peace, protection. And that's why the T part of Raft is so very important.
Well, if you want to hear the story behind Raft that he referenced, you got to read it in the book. It's a fun part of what you unpack in there. I want to pull a little bit more on the thread of like everything you share in the book is like very extremely positive. The stories very uplifting. What you share in terms of discerning who or what you interact with. I'm sure people ask you, do you feel like you're sometimes interacting with angels, demons? Is it just always spirits of departed loved ones? I would imagine that comes up from time to time. How do you respond to that?
Well, I don't believe in hell or the devil or demons. And I know that a lot, it's funny because Christians and Muslims are in love with hell and they get all bent out of shape when they hear this. And you know what? The beautiful thing about living in the United States and in any democracy is freedom of belief. So if you want to believe in those things, and if you need that form of negativity to persuade you to do the right thing, then that's okay. But in the 15,000 plus readings that I've done, I connect with spirits of deceased loved ones. Animals have souls, which is very fascinating, animal communication, and entities that I do refer to as angels. And the fascinating thing about angels is that they were never human. People say, my loved one has died, they become an angel. And I understand why you're saying that. Okay. But angels seem to be a different species entirely. And the more that those of us who work with the other side, we realize that there is a vast array of non human spiritual intelligence. Now, some of it isn't necessarily concerned with or aligned with humans, and may come across a little bit colder with that cold chills and tingles, which is why people tend to label things as evil or demonic. Why? Because we tend to fear what we don't understand. Now, I realize that not everybody's going to agree with me, but this has been my experience.
Well, and I'm definitely intrigued that you talked about animals having souls. I can vouch for many of the people that I've talked to who've had near-death experiences. They talk about encountering their pets in heaven. They talk
Yeah.
about a beloved puppy that they had or whatnot, and so that's a pretty common theme. Or just other animals in heaven. I've had people talk about encountering horses in heaven, and so that
Yeah.
is a consistent theme I've seen across many NDEs. And I just love how you've helped us to process this in the sense that one thing I always like to remind people of the way we process some of these things, it's all based on worldview. So our upbringing, um, our faith, all these things like feed into and give us a grid for how we're processing this. So I just love how you've helped us understand how you process things. I know for my audience, which is a primarily Christian audience, a book like yours might be a challenge. I've enjoyed the process of talking to you, but also just reading the book. It challenged me, it sharpened me. You help me see things from different angles than I maybe have seen some of them before. So for the Christian reader in my audience who's on the fence of should I read this book, should I not read this book, like what's the thing you hope they encounter in this message?
Well, as this is my life message, about 2 weeks after my mother passed, I was a senior partner of a law firm, and I was devastated. People think, "Oh, well, you're a medium, you can connect with her." Yeah, but I'm still a human being, and my mom died, and I was coming back from my office, and one of those waves of grief hit me. So I knew I had to pull over because I shouldn't be driving, and I pulled into this parking lot of the strip mall, and this flash of light went off in the car, and I wasn't sure if I was seeing it with my physical eyes or my mind's eye. And I instinctively turned to the passenger side of the car, and I saw for an instant my mother's silhouette in this beautiful silver white light. And then her voice filled my head. And she said, "Mark, you've been given the gift of mediumship so that you would not be crushed by grief, but now you must help others with their grief. And your life mission is to help people understand that God exists, that heaven exists, that our souls are eternal living beings, that you can communicate with souls, and that we will be reunited in the light and the love that is God." So that is the perspective that I take writing my book. You know, many times, people say, "Well, I'm a Christian, I'm a Christian." But saying that makes you no more a Christian than standing in a garage makes you a mechanic. You've got to do it. And the beautiful thing about Jesus's teachings is he really raised the bar pretty high. And it's easy to say, love one another as you love yourself, and do treat other people, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Boy, that's really easy to say and a lot more challenging to do. And I think that that is something we must all aspire to every day of our lives.
Well, Mark, thank you for a fascinating conversation and a fascinating book. In terms of connecting with you, finding out more about your books, other resources, where do we discover you on the web?
My website, which is afterlifefrequency.com, same as my book, The Afterlife Frequency. And I encourage people to sign up for my newsletter. I have a weekly show, The Psychic and the Doc. My co host is Dr. Pat Basili, street smart spiritual behavioral psychologist. And we do take calls from listeners, and we have many fascinating guests, just like you do, Sean. And you can find out about all of that at afterlifefrequency.com.
And we'll make it easy like we do with every episode. We'll have links in the show notes to places where you can pick up this book and places where you can connect with Mark as well. It's time to bring this episode of the Sean Tabbitt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Mark Anthony. Once again, our book today was The Afterlife Frequency, the scientific proof of spiritual contact and how that awareness will change your life. And Mark, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you.